I was like, well, if I throw a mic on, then I can help others the way that these people have all helped me.
Born in the heart of the Pennsylvania deer camp, with the help of experts, friends, and local legends, we bring you valuable knowledge and powerful stories for your hunting adventures. Welcome to the East Meets West Hunt Podcast with your host, Beau Martonik.
All right, so we're doing a brand new series of the podcast here called the Gear Talk series. Just short, to the point, 10, 15 minutes or so of me going through specific gear items that I'm using or a collection of gear. And on this one, we're going to go through and talk about my 2024 bow setup, which is a Hoyt RX8. So Hoyt, brand new to me to be able to shoot, but after talking with my buddies, Jared and Jeremy down at the Hunter podcast and getting to mess around with their RX8s, I fell in love with the bow. Always liked carbon on different platforms and gear, and to be able to see that with a bow, I fell in love with it instantly. So my bow here, the RX8, the axle to axle's about 30 and a half, or I think it's actually 30 and 5/16 inches. So relatively shorter than some of my other bows I've been using, 31 to 33 inch axle to axle. This feels good. The string angle isn't too steep for me. I'm a 28 inch draw, so this gives me some good maneuverability and be able to shooting from out of a tree or in a ground setup, anything, but still not too short that it hurts my actual shooting ability. So I'm really pumped about this bow, and I have it here in the Bourbon color, which when I saw that right away, I was like, this is the color bow that I wanted to get. And but to give you a little bit more details on this bow and kind of one of the reasons why, or some of the reasons why I chose to shoot it. Well, first and foremost, the draw cycle on it. I mean, you hear bow manufacturers and marketing all the time that talks about, smoothness of draw. But really, when you pull this back, and actually when I had my dad shooting it the other day, and he was like, there's no valley in it. It's just straight all the way back until you hit the back wall. And I love that. It doesn't, cam over real hard at any particular point. It's super smooth drawing, comfortable to be able to shoot, easy to be able to hold back. Really like that. And then just how quiet it is when it shoots, dead in the hand. And it's also, I haven't run it on a chronograph yet, which I am going to try out one of those Garmin Zero chronographs to mess around with and see how fast it is, but it feels significantly faster than other bows I've used in the past. And mostly I can see that by even where my sight position is. And it's really difficult to tell as far as like how hard it hits a target or anything. But as far as the sight positioning and where that's at in relation to the arrow rest and having some travel there. So I put a dialed Arxos 3V sight on there, which I've used this sight on the last 2 years, I think, on it. And I like the sight. And the first sight I had from dialed was a test one, and I had some slight concerns with durability, but it was a prototype version of it. And so far, since I've had these ones, they hold tight. As long as you make sure everything's synced up there, it works really well. It's a clean, lightweight sight. I've used the Spot Hog Fast Eddies, and I really like those sights. Had one of those for quite a few years. The dialed is just simple, to the point to be able to use, and I love the vertical 3-pin. From a whitetail standpoint, I leave it set as my top pin at either 20 or 25, depending on what the setup is. And then the other pin marks tell me where I'm at for the second point down and then third point down. And I don't have this one. I don't have the second and third points sighted in yet. But I remember on my last bow, it was like, say if I was at 25, my second pin would be 37 and my third one was 50. I would imagine that those gaps are going to be a little tighter on this bow from just shooting faster, but it complements it well. I got it in the whiskey color, So the whiskey color matches identical to Hoyt's Bourbon, as you can tell they worked on that together. So that turned out pretty cool. But going back to the bow itself, I worked at an archery shop for 3 years and got to see a bunch of different bows. Actually, Hoyt was one of the only bows that we were not a dealer for at that time. That bow shop, Bucks and Bows, is now a Hoyt dealer. But so I didn't mess around with tuning them or anything with the cams a whole lot. But one thing that was really interesting to me, and this is, I'm going to start out with a cosmetic feature of it that may not seem like a big deal, but if you've hunted a lot on the ground or you're elk hunting or doing something, it's a really nice added feature. And there's a little bump here that sticks out above the string on the top and bottom. So when you set your bow down, you set it on the ground, your string and your cam isn't digging in the dirt, on the rocks. Every one of my bows that I've had is all dinged up there and having serving missing on there from me putting it down. And you might say maybe you just don't need to be that hard on gear, but when you're hunting, I want to focus on hunting and not worrying about what my gear is doing. So that's a really nice added feature in it. And then also within the cam, so these are the HBX exact cams that they have 3 different settings as far as what you have your let off. So 85, 80, and 75. That can be quickly adjusted with an Allen wrench. And then also an extra hard and a hard back wall setting. So personally, I like hard back walls. I want to know where I'm at. I don't like sponginess. I got mine set at extra hard. But what you need to know is when you do that, that does shorten your draw length just a little bit. So it shortens up your draw length a little bit. So when you're setting your draw length, that is something to pay attention to. Now, the Hoyts do come standard with it on extra hard, and then you can adjust it there. So really, you're not actually shortening it, you're lengthening it once you put it on hard versus the extra hard. And to go a little bit more detail on this cam, the other thing I really liked was the 1/4 inch draw adjustments. Now, I've always been, if you measure me, so if you take my arms, you put them out and you measure from tip to tip, I come out to be a 28-inch draw length. But I've traditionally shot 27.5 because I like a little bit more bend in my elbow. You start getting layers on and you're hunting in cold weather. I like to have a little bit shorter of a draw length. But I wanted just a little bit more to be able to have some different adjustments and make it feel, I'd love 27 3/4 on previous bow models. Well, Hoyt allows you to be able to do that in 1/4 inch adjustments. So it's really nice to be able to do, but I did end up finding out, and each bow manufacturer is going to be a little bit different, but the 28 works really well for me and actually feels like a 27 3/4 on some other bows. So I like that. I'm able to fine tune it, and I can do that really easily without even using a bow press. But being myself, I do have a bow press here. I have a full-on home bow shop that I've built over time and spent quite a bit of time of learning some tuning things. I'm not the best in the world. I'll never claim to be, but I can get it pretty close. And through some time, I can work out problems typically when it comes down to the tuning aspect of it. And the way you would tune these bows, so say you had a paper tear and it was, say you had a right tear. Well, you can move, let me see here, make sure I'm saying this right. You can move your top or your bottom or both cams over by their spacer system. So they come with one bigger one and one smaller one, and you just flop them. Now, if you have a right paper tear, so your fletchings are going to the right, then you can put the bigger spacer on the left side to move that cam over. That helps correct it versus moving your rest all over. So I like to, once I have my rest center shot, then that's where I move it. But the purpose of this video isn't to go into whole video and podcast to go into a lot of detail on the actual tuning aspect of the bow, is more so just to kind of go through the full bow setup. But I thought that was something important to note. Hoyt does have a spacer tool to be able to adjust that. And when I was messing around with it, I didn't have the spacer tool, but I was able to figure it out and get that stuff fine-tuned with those spacers there. And to dive a little bit deeper. So after you look at the cam systems, one question that I had, specifically was with the carbon. It's like, okay, the carbon bow costs quite a bit more than, say, the Alpha X, which is their aluminum bow. What are some of the benefits? One of the benefits is warm to touch. So have you ever been in a tree stand, you have your bow hanging, or you're in a saddle, you have it hanging there all day, it's super cold, all of a sudden a buck comes in, you grab your bow, you take it off, and you're sitting there for a while. You're waiting. Now your hand's going to get cold, especially I wear thin gloves. You have it in your muff, but to grab onto a really cold metal riser will make your hand a heck of a lot colder in a shorter amount of time than a carbon bow that is resistant to that cold. So that's something that I've found for me personally was a really nice added benefit. And then the carbon is just extremely, extremely strong. You can see videos of them driving over them with trucks on the risers. They just hold up to a lot of weight. But really, the biggest thing for me is the warmth aspect of grabbing onto the bow there. And to go a little bit deeper on this setup, I have the Hoyt and QAD collaboration Ultra Rest Integrate MX2. So that just bolts right on directly to the back of the riser. Super easy to be able to put on. Tells you where you need to have it at. Micro adjustment to be able to click it in. And honestly, I have everything set on 0. Yeah, everything is still set on 0, meaning I put it up, and by the time I paper tuned it, I didn't have to adjust that rest up, down, side to side. Went right on, really easy to the point. As I keep working my way down the bow here, the grip. So one thing that I've heard in the past with some Hoyts, and I don't really have a lot of experience with some of the previous ones, but was the grips were rounded and people were putting on different grips with it. Well, the grip that they have on these now, I believe they're called the Vital grip. I could be incorrect with that term, but it has more of a flat back to it that gives you that consistency with the hand position, but still a smaller grip. Nice to be able to grab onto and be able to hold and keep a good position. So if you're using a different bow, might be a little bit getting used to, as with any bow manufacturer, it takes a little bit to feel out the setups, but I really liked the grip on there. And then to keep working my way down on the bow here, now we'll go into the stabilizer setups. So all of Hoyt's accessories, their inline accessories that come with it, fit really nicely, and obviously they're built by them to be made for the bow, but their stabilizer setups, you have your traditional spot that's up here, and then you have a lower spot that's all the way down by the limb. So why would you want that all the way down? And when you have weight down lower on the bow, it stabilizes it better. I mean, think about it with a tripod that you have set up. Having that weight down lower helps make a more stable platform and balance it out with less weight than you would if you had it up a little bit higher. So I'm just running the little shortstop stabilizer on the bottom piece there. And then I also have the Go-stix 2.0s, which I'll talk about here in a second. And then I also am running a back bar, just a small 6-inch back bar with the SL Adaptor. And it just goes right in to the slotted holes here that were meant for these inline accessories. It's really easy. And what I like about these stabilizers, I've never been someone that got real technical stabilizers. I don't think you really need to, but one thing is important is the majority of this stabilizer is super light, but where the weight and the sound dampening features are out on the end of it. So that's where they have the weight where it's needed, but the whole setup is super light. It doesn't add a ton of weight to your bow. From a target shooting perspective, it's one thing to have your bow perfectly balanced and all this stuff, and you might have a lot of weight on it, but when being a hunter, I want something that is middle of the road, something that balances well, but is not over the top. I want to be able to carry this thing around in the mountains for 2 weeks and not feel like I'm carrying a boat anchor. So I like that a lot. But the Go-stix that I mentioned, the 2.0s, they come off the bow right behind whatever stabilizer you have on the front, and you can adjust them in, I believe it's 3 different positions here. But it's so, if you've ever, been on a stalk or you're hunting from the ground or in a ground blind, I'm always setting my bow on the side, but being able to have it vertical, have an arrow knocked in there and just ready to go. So I'm setting a bow down the ground. It sets up, stands perfectly fine. And by doing that, there's I have ones actually right on the wall here behind me that would clamp onto my limbs itself, but I just didn't like something that would attach to the limbs when you're shooting. I don't know, it was more of maybe a confidence thing, but I felt like it would change how the bow is shooting. I just didn't like that. This screws right in behind the stabilizer, stays there. You can move it out of the way. I won't most likely use it for whitetail hunting out of a tree. Not really a purpose for that with me there. But yeah, just I think those things are probably one of the simplest accessories, but one of the things I'm looking forward to the most with it. Just because when you've been in hunting scenarios where you're on a stalk, you're sitting on the ground for a while, to be able to have your bow ready to go and just to be able to grab onto it when all of a sudden you see an animal sneaking by you and you're in an ambush type setup and he's coming out at 10 yards and you can't make a bunch of movement to take your bow from horizontal to vertical, it helps out a lot. But I did want to go back to one thing I forgot to mention with the rest. So I've used a Hamskea rest on all my bows for the last like 4 or 5 years. And I like the limb driven rest a lot. I used to use a QAD. I like the limb driven for the purpose of if they were to be damaged in the field, you could fix it super easy. There's no timing that's involved with it. You just tie it up, make sure it's tight on your limb and you're good to go. But what I found is having the full capture of the QAD where you can have it flipped up and in place. Now, are there things that can go wrong with it? Yes, there definitely can. If you cut your string trying to time it, or you cut the string on the cord, trying to time it again in the field is a little bit more difficult than just tying it tight. But I like the full capture mode. I can move my bow around, twist it different side to side. My arrow is not going to fall off the riser. So that makes that super nice. To go with on my string here, so I have the Hamskea Raptor Peep, and it's a 3/16 Peep. I've used that size. I've used a 1/4 inch as well. The 3/16 fits around my dialed housing perfectly, which makes that really nice to be able to line up and get consistent shooting. And it still allows a lot of light in. The 1/4 inch allows for more light in when you're hunting in low light scenarios in that last moment of truth. But the 3/16, I've honestly never had a problem looking through it within the legal shooting time parameters. So I like that. I've liked that Peep sight quite a bit, and I've had those on my bows for quite a while. It reduces any glare from the sun. You're always looking through a clear picture of it, but it is important that you make sure that is straight in your string to be able to get the right sight picture through there. Let's see here. So going through the Quiver system. So again, one of Hoyt's inline accessories on the bow I have here right now, I have the 6-arrow, the Superlite 2-piece, because this quiver is going to stay on my bow for Western hunting. That's my first hunts that are coming up. That quiver staying on my bow. This is super light. I can pull the arrows right out the back, be able to load it up. Super nice and easy. A 6-arrow option gives me the ability to carry one more arrow than I've had in my 5-arrow quivers before. Backpack hunts, things like that, makes a whole lot of sense to have that. Now I do have a different quiver here that I'll be putting on for whitetail. It's just a 4-arrow quiver, and it's a 1-piece. So it's the Superlite QD from Hoyt's inline accessories, and I'll put that on the side because I'm not going to be shooting with this on a whole lot. I'm going to be taking it off and hanging it in the tree during that time period. And if I need 6 arrows in a whitetail scenario, I probably did something wrong and I should go back home and practice, but never say never. But yeah, I think that's just about the full round out of my bow setup there. And let me just make sure, look at my notes here. To make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, the arrows and the release. That's what I got left. So my arrows, I'm using Iron Will's Easton collaboration arrows. So Iron Will sells them over on their website. So I have the Axis 5mm. I really like Easton from the standpoint of I've shot numerous arrow manufacturers over the recent years, and I've liked a lot of them, but I like Easton's, made here in the US, and they've just been around for a while making consistent arrows. And Bill from Iron Will is a whiz, so when he says the way that he's building the arrows are pretty good. I've used their components in a bunch of other arrows before. They're super strong, and I like that. So I've got the Arxos 5mm, the 300 spine arrows, and I have a 15mm insert, or 15 grain insert, and a 10mm or 10 grain outsert, excuse me, and a 125 grain head. And then just the 3 fletch on the back, the Iron Will, their version of, I don't believe they're the Max Hunter. I should know this because I'm about to do a podcast with Bill talking about some things he's found out from a study about veins. But that's my arrow setup. The total arrow weight is coming in at about 470 grains, which is, I like that setup. I think I'll be good. I know I'll be good for elk. For whitetails, it's a good middle of the road setup, so that, you know, I'm not going to have a whole lot of pin gap, but I still have enough energy to punch through some big game animals with it. So pretty excited about that arrow setup. For broadheads, I'm going to use the Iron Will wides for whitetail, which I've used for a long time, and the Iron Will double bevel, the S125s. I like to use those for big game elk. They'll fly as good as my field tips do, as long as my bow's in tune. So like that setup. 2 separate releases that I got here. So I have the knock on, knock to it. Been using that release for a while. I like it. It's I've had some issues with it hanging up specifically on an elk hunt. I got some grass in here behind the trigger. So it really wasn't the release's fault, but definitely make sure you pay attention to that if you're crawling around with it, to make sure it stays clean, because I've had it happen a few different times with that. And but I like that for longer range shooting, western hunting. But for whitetails, I like a trigger style release. So I have the Spot Hog Wise Guy that I shorten up really short, so my whole finger goes around the trigger, and that I can pull through it and not just punch the trigger like I used to with it. But that's everything with my bow setup. If you have any questions on it, feel free to reach out and ask any questions. But or if you have any specific gear items that you want me to cover in this podcast series, please feel free to reach out. Would love to be able to go through that with you, and hopefully that it was beneficial. If you're listening to this episode, you may want to watch it on YouTube if you want to see all of the features of the bow, all the different things that I'm showing it here, and subscribe to the channel there. That's just under my name, Beau Martonik. But I appreciate everyone listening to this episode of the Gear Talk series within the East Meets West Hunt podcast.
Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, share it with your buddies. Leave us a rating, a review, and subscribe. If you want to check out more content like this, there's plenty in the links below. We truly appreciate having you guys along with us.